Hi, it's Kathy Limata. Today I'm going to read you a story called The Titanic, the disaster that shocked the world. I bet you know something about the Titanic already. Let's see what they'll tell us. Titanic, the disaster that shocked the world. The greatest ship. The greatest ship. When the White Star Line announced the competition of the supership, the Titanic, in 1912, they said that she was the greatest ship ever built, luxurious, unsinkable, and unbelievably big. How big was she? The Titanic was more than 882 feet, 269 meters long. That's the length of 22 buses lined up end to end. She was the largest movable object in the world at that time. When the Titanic passed a small ship, she was like a cloud going by, a big black cloud that blotted out the sun. Giant propellers. Everything about the Titanic was big. Each of her three propellers was as big as a windmill. The Titanic's hull, or lower body, was divided into 16 compartments. Up to 4 could flood, and she could still be afloat. That's the picture of the turbines. Here's the next picture. The Titanic was like a floating palace. There were elegant restaurants, Turkish baths, that's like a swimming pool, and a big swimming pool. Each class had separate rooms, lounges, and eating areas. And at that time, a class was like how much money you made. So there was different spots for the wealthy, and then people who had a little bit of money, and then the poor. There were different spots for them to eat and hang out. On her maiden or first voyage, she would sail across the Atlantic from England to New York City. In charge of the Titanic was Captain Edward J. Smith. He would navigate. See if I can show you him. He would navigate from the bridge, or, I can't read backwards, at the front of the ship. This was to be his last voyage before retiring. Oh, he had one more journey and then he would be done working. Newspapers called the ship the Millionaire's Special, but its passengers were really from all walks of life. John Jacob Astor and his wife had first-class tickets. They were among the wealthiest passengers and had a suite or a group of rooms fit for a king. Not so rich people were going too. Many were immigrants, all with their possessions in their luggage, hoping to start a new life in America. So here's that couple that has a suite. On the bottom, it shows you a ticket. A costly ticket. A first-class ticket costs more than a crew member could earn in 18 years. Wow. All aboard! At last, the Titanic is ready to set sail from England, teeming with more than 1,000 passengers. Among them are dozens of children. Edmund and Michael Narvan from France are traveling in second class with their father. So that means they're not poor, but they're not really rich. Second class. They are only 2 and 3 years old. Crowds on the docks are waving flags and handkerchiefs. Some are cheering while others are shouting, "Good luck, Titanic." Passengers wave goodbye to friends and family. Danger ahead. After 3 days at sea, the trip had seemed like a vacation for most passengers. But soon the Titanic will be entering an area of North Atlantic Ocean where icebergs float. All day the Titanic had received iceberg warnings in Morse code over the wireless telegraph. Now, as the ship speeds through the night, lookouts watch for icebergs from the crow's nest. All is quiet on this freezing cold night, and the ocean is incredibly calm. By then, with their watch about to come to an end, the lookouts see a dark object looming ahead. It is an iceberg, and the Titanic is heading straight toward it. Quickly, one of the lookouts, people watching, sounds the alarm bell and shouts into the telephone connecting to the bridge. That's where they're sailing from. Iceberg ahead! Here's 2 pictures. With no time to waste, the first officer calls for the ship's wheel to be turned as far as possible. Then he orders the engines to be stopped and put into reverse. High in the crow's nest, the lookouts brace themselves for collision as the iceberg looms closer and closer. Slowly the ship starts to veer away from the iceberg, but too late. There is a slight bump and a rippling noise as the iceberg scrapes the starboard side of the Titanic. Many passengers are asleep. The small bump to the ship isn't enough to disturb their sleep, but it wakes Captain Smith. He rushes to the bridge to find out what has happened. Down below, the men working in one of the boiler rooms are almost swept off their feet as water gushes into the room. Within minutes, the water is waist high. Automatic doors begin to seal the flooding compartments. The men rush to escape before they shut, but the water is rising higher and higher and flowing over the tops of the compartments, flooding one after another. Uncover the boats, Captain Smith orders his crew. Then he instructs the 2 wireless operators to start signaling for help. He knows the Titanic is going to sink, and he knows that there are not enough lifeboats to get all the passengers safely off. Not far from the panic in the boiler room, many passengers are still fast asleep, unaware of the collision. Out on the 3rd-class deck, a few passengers find chunks of ice and start playing soccer with the chunks of ice. They have no idea how much danger they are in. It is now past midnight. Many passengers come up from their rooms in their pajamas. Some are still wearing their evening clothes. Colonel Astor and his wife make their way to the gymnasium next to the boat deck. While they wait for the crew to get lifeboats ready, Colonel Astor cuts through a spare life jacket to show his wife what's inside. Now the crew begins to direct the passengers into the boat. "Women and children first," they shout. So here's people playing with those ice chunks. And here's a picture of a life jacket. Looks about the same as ours, maybe a little different. It's not colorful like ours nowadays. The crew lowers the first lifeboat 60 feet down to the ocean, but there are only 28 people in the boat for 65 people. The passengers don't want to leave the Titanic. The boat seems unsteady compared to the big ship. The band is even playing cheerful music. One by one, the lifeboats are lowered. Then disaster looms. Boat number 13 drifts under another lifeboat that is being lowered. The boat nearly crashes on top of number 13. At the last moment, the passenger frees the rope holding number 13 and the boat flows away to safety. As the lifeboats are lowered, lights are seen on the horizon. Another ship is out there. It is far away. But the crew of the Titanic has a way to get its attention. They fire distress rockets that explode like fireworks in the sky. Then they use the Morse lamp. There's no response. Titanic wirelessly operators keep calling for help. That's where they do tit-tit-tit-tit-tit-tit-tit-tit with their little code. Although other ships are close enough, the wireless operators on some of these ships are asleep. The Olympic, the Titanic's sister ship, has heard the distress call, but she is too far away to be of help. You can see in the water there's some of the lifeboats. Not all lifeboats were full, though. Slowly, slowly, the boat sinks farther. Slowly, slowly, the stern rises above it, the front of the boat. The band plays on, trying to keep the passengers calm. But everyone realizes now that the Titanic cannot be saved. The last wooden lifeboat is about to be lowered. Colonel Astor is waving goodbye to his wife. He is not allowed to board. With more than 1,500 passengers still left, the crew has formed a protective circle around the lifeboat so that only women and children can take the last few seats. Colonel Astor rushes to the kennels where his dog Kitty is kept. He sets all dogs free so they will not be trapped. Michael and Edmund Norrell are still on the ship. Their father has wrapped them in a blanket to keep warm. Their only hope of escape is the last collapsed boat, about to be launched. Their father pushes forward and hands them to a woman sitting on the boat. Then he steps back into the crowd. The music has stopped now. The ship lights are still glowing in the dark. As the front of the ship rises higher into the air, everything inside the ship slides to the bow. Pianos, furniture, statues, paintings, dishes, luggage. Oh, maybe the stern is the back. Every object on the boat crashes down and piles up. On the deck, there are still hundreds of passengers. The slant on the deck is so steep that now they cannot stand straight. Some are clinging desperately to the rails. Others lose their grip and fall into the sea. It is a long drop, like falling from a tall building. Those wearing life jackets are kept afloat, but the water is icy cold, and they soon will freeze to death if they are not rescued. The Titanic lights flicker as she plunges. Then she's gone. People in the water scream for help, but their cries soon die down. The survivors huddle together, cold and afraid. Here in the North Atlantic, there is no first, second, or third class. Rich and poor, young and old, they are all in this together, all of them hoping to survive, none of them knowing what will happen next. The survivor in the lifeboat had rowed away from the ships. They feared that they would either be sucked down with the Titanic as she sank or swamped by the people in the water. But now some sailors decide to row back to the floating wreckage of the Titanic. They want to see if anyone still is alive. They row through hundreds of frozen bodies to find 4 survivors. One dies shortly after. The rescue. It is almost dawn. The survivors have been at sea for several hours now without food, water, or warm clothing. Many are almost frozen to death. Suddenly they see rockets in the distance. Another ship is on its way. Help has arrived. It is the Carpathia. Her crew has heard the Titanic's distress call, but the ship was 58 miles away and 3-hour trip. She has arrived too late to save the people in the water, but not too late to save the people in the lifeboats. One by one, the Titanic survivors board the Carpathia. Some climb a rope ladder to reach the deck of the ship. Others who are too weak or too young to climb huddle aboard the cargo nets. Everyone is counted. 2,206 passengers. Only 705. There were 2,206 passengers, but only 705 have survived. Wow. The Carpathia now heads for New York. The journey will take 3 days. Friends and relatives have been frantic for news. They are confused by the types of reports. The Carpathia is not releasing any information, and newspapers are making up stories. One says everyone survived and that the Titanic is being towed by another ship. Other newspapers say many have died. In New York, people wait anxious for the Carpathia, hoping they will see their loved ones step off the ship. At last, the Carpathia sails into New York Harbor. Nearly 30,000 people are lining the docks. Among them are doctors and nurses sent to help the survivors. The gangplank is lowered from the Carpathia, and the first survivors walk down. People on the dock rush forward. Some call out names of their relatives. Harold Bride is the only surviving wireless operator, is carried off the ship. His feet are badly frostbitten and have been bandaged. Also among the survivors are 2 dogs. Michael and Edmund Nariel are safe. They are being looked after by a survivor until they can be reunited with their mother, Marcelia, in France. She did not know that they were on the Titanic. The children's father had been separated from their mother and had kidnapped the boys. He had told travelers that their mother was dead. Marcelia recognizes her son from a photograph in a French newspaper, telling the tragic story about the 2 orphaned boys. Mrs. Astor is among the survivors. She had helped to row her lifeboat away from the sinking Titanic. Out in the ocean, ships are finding bodies of victims. Many of them cannot be identified, but Colonel Astor's body is identified. His initials are printed on his shirt collar. Captain Smith's body is not found among the 328 bodies recovered. Some reports say that he was standing on the bridge before the ship was sunk. Discovered. In the years after the Titanic sank, many people wanted to find her, but the ship's exact location was a mystery, and the technology didn't exist to reach her even if her whereabouts had been known. The Titanic had plunged 12,460 feet. That's the height of the Empire State Building. More than 70 years have passed. Then, in 1985, a team led by Dr. Robert Ballard used his unmanned diving vessel called the Argo. Unmanned means it goes by itself. It's like a robot. Argo had a video camera that sent pictures back to the research vessel. The experts sent Argo down to the bottom of the ocean. Day after day, Argo searched the seabed for signs of the wreck, but saw nothing. Then one day, an object appeared on the monitor of the research ship. It was an image of a huge boiler. The Titanic had been found. She had broken into 2, and her contents spilled across the seabed. Two years later, another submersible, a Nautil, visited the Titanic site. It was equipped with the latest technology, including a movable video camera that could fit inside the rooms of the Titanic. The Nautil also had 2 robotic arms, which were operated by a pilot inside the submersible. These arms had different attachments that enabled the pilot to pick up various types of objects. The Nautil brought back thousands of ordinary objects that were scattered over the seabed: toys, eyeglasses, money, and jewels. They were all that remained of the Titanic's victims. Once on dry land, the objects were carefully cleaned and stored so that they could be on display in exhibits. These objects help tell the story of the Titanic and her passengers. Nautilus technology also enabled scientists to answer the question that they had remained a mystery since the sinking. What really did happen on the Titanic? The evidence showed that the iceberg did not carve a 300-foot gash along the side of the Titanic as suspected. Instead, the iceberg had made 6 small cuts below the waterline, which had allowed water to gush into her hull. By examining the wreck, the Titanic scientists were also able to explain exactly how she broke. You can see there's some pictures there. I'll read them in just a moment. I can't read backwards. The Titanic hits the iceberg, which scrapes the ship in 6 places. Water gushes through the narrow openings. 2. The compartments flood, one after another. The weight of the water in the bow starts to pull the ship under. The front funnel collapses. Then as the stern rises in the air, the other funnels also start to crash under the strain. The strain on the ship is so great that she breaks apart. The bow plunges to the bottom. The stern starts to float and then sinks. Last page. Lessons of the Titanic. When the Titanic sank in 1912, a full inquiry was launched at the time. Many questions were asked. Would the Titanic have sunk if she had not sailed at full speed on that fatal night? Was her design at fault? All these issues were discussed, but more importantly, new safety regulations for passenger liners were passed. Ships had to carry enough lifeboats for everyone. Wireless operators had to listen to the radios all night long. And special airborne ice patrols was set up to help warn ships of dangerous icebergs. Never again would people dare call any ship unsinkable. The Titanic was a cruel lesson for everyone. Michael talks to another survivor at the Titanic reunion in 1996. He could recall being placed in a sack and then hauled to safety aboard the Carpathia. That's one of those little boys that we talked about, the orphans. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to the Titanic. Perhaps you already knew about it, but it's fun to hear it again. Take care.